Well, hello, welcome. We're going to talk today about Van Morrison. I have met him, and I will tell you at the end what we talked about and what he said. Some of it may surprise you, some of it may not. He was born Ivan George Morrison in 1945 in Belfast. The young Ivan was exposed to one of the largest record collections in Northern Ireland at mass when his father, an electrician, George, had worked in Detroit in the early 1950s, and this included blues and jazz albums, and the young Ivan soaked it up like a sponge. Apparently he taught himself to play the saxophone, I think at the age of 10 or something, by playing a toy saxophone, and which is no mean feat. He learned to play the guitar himself, and his mother had been a dancer in her youth, so not the normal childhood of somebody born in Belfast. And he left school at 15 and joined a band, and they played all over the place, and then eventually he formed a band called Them. Van Morrison always says he is a true singer-songwriter, in that he was a singer first and a songwriter second. Quite an interesting thing, that, because it means that if you're a singer, you write songs for yourself, in effect.
Because I never lost the thing that I'm a singer.
That's what I mean.
So even when I'm performing, doing my own songs, I'm doing my own songs as a singer, singing, words that I wrote.
One of Van Morrison's most covered songs is Gloria, one of the first songs he ever wrote when he was with Them. He wrote it backstage apparently in about 10 minutes, and it was formed from a jam on stage, and that's basically what it was. And that is the most recorded song, I think, of Van Morrison's. Towards the end of Them, they played in the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, and the support band was The Doors. And so at the end, they jammed with Jim Morrison. And so when The Doors did Gloria, it's because they heard Van Morrison do it with them. So there you go. Before we go any further about Van Morrison, can I just say, if you like this video, please like it, blah, blah, blah. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. That really does help everybody, and share it with your friends. Now back to Van Morrison.
Hello, fire ducks of your dreams. Well, more being stealing around the sky.
Them broke up under very acrimonious circumstances in the summer of 1966. The manager, Phil Solomon, was a bit dodgy with the finances. Apparently when they were in the States, their visas expired and things like that. And they came back and they had basically no money at the end of it. So the band broke up. Van Morrison went to the States. This guy called Bert Berns, who was quite an influential songwriter and producer and manager. Bert Berns had written some amazing songs, including Twist and Shout, which was famously a #1, I think, for the Beatles, and Hold On Sloopy, do you remember that? Piece of My Heart and Here Come Tonight, which obviously was recorded by them. And that's where Van Morrison came across him, and he produced such greats as Under the Boardwalk, and so he was a pretty influential guy, and he took on Van Morrison and signed him for a recording deal, and an album called Blowing Your Mind came out of that, and that had some great tracks on it, including one song called Brown Eyed Girl.
Brown-eyed girl, do my brown-eyed girl, you're a mama well.
Which was released as a single and became a hit throughout the world, especially in the United States. But for some reason, Van Morrison hates that song. In fact, he said recently that it's not even in the top 500 of his best songs, so there you go. I would disagree, and so would a lot of people, and he refused to play it live, but that's Van Morrison for you. Apparently, when he was in Them, I can't remember who told me this, but somebody who knew him said that when he was in his flat, and I can't remember, I think it was somebody who shared a flat with him, he used to flick his cigarette ash onto his trousers. And apparently when he walked, it looked like he was his trousers were smoking with all the ash that was like. And what happened was Bert Berns died, and unfortunately his widow pursued Van Morrison for everything that he had, and he couldn't perform live and things like that. And he had a very hard time and actually destitute at this time, and he was in the States and had no money whatsoever. And fortunately, because he was such a talented guy, Warner Brothers bought out his contract, and he recorded a lot of albums with them, starting with Astral Weeks and Moondance. Astral Weeks is regarded, at the time, nobody wanted to know. It received so-so reviews. This Celtic soul idea didn't really catch on at the time. It was just later on that everybody realised how good it was. I think he's done approaching 40 studio albums now. Not all of them are total classics. He said from time to time that a lot of the albums he did for himself. They weren't supposed to be commercial albums, and people didn't quite get that, because he's had this problem with the music business. Obviously, he's had a very hard time with early managers and the suits and things like that. So he's got a very mistrustful view of the music industry. So he does work on the outside of it as much as he can. And he said that Common One, for example, was not meant to be a commercial album, and because he very rarely does interviews and things, his side of things never really gets out.
On my common one, with a coat so old, and a line in the head, something so high.
Can't really talk about Van Morrison without talking about religion and mysticism in his music, because let's not forget he was brought up in Northern Ireland, a very sectarian place at the time. His family were Protestant, but he was open to influences from everybody, and apparently he had lots of friends who were across the religious divide. A lot of his father's record collection that he was so avidly interested in as a child featured gospel and all kinds of influences of the religious type, so this must have seeped into his soul somewhere. His music was described as Celtic soul, I think, by him, and it's part of this thing where he played with the old Celtic religion. He also got involved very briefly in Scientology later, and I think he was basically asking questions, and this is reflected in his music.
Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystery.
Van Morrison is still going now, and I've seen him play several times, and he's never been anything less than great. I mean, people talk about him being grouchy. I don't think so. One of the things I really like about him playing live was he used to do things for Vince Power at his small clubs, where they charge like £50 or whatever, £45 to see him. And they were very intimate, and he used to ban phones and cameras and that sort of thing, which is good, but it also means that you don't get much online about it. But whenever I've been, he's always been quite amenable, and in my experience, when an artist like Chuck Berry or Van Morrison isn't happy on stage, 99% out of 100, it's due to the fact that the promoter, the person who's paying them, isn't treating them with respect. This is what I found throughout my life. I always try to treat the artists I work with respect and pay them fairly, but unfortunately, not everybody is like me, thank God, some might say. So that's what I found. I did meet Van Morrison in, well, I thought it was the 1980s, but it appears to be the 1990s, because he was with Michelle Rocca, who became his wife and was a former Miss Ireland.
With Van Morrison by her side, Michelle Rocca faced the media tonight, minutes after the jury verdict in the High Court that found she had been assaulted by Cathal Ryan in March 1992.
Well, what it was Wilko Johnson, who I was on tour with, was playing in Dublin, and Van Morrison, through an intermediary, arranged to come and watch the show from a balcony in the club. I was standing next to him, and he was very pleasant to me. Not, obviously, we weren't friends or anything, but he wasn't impolite to me. And then afterwards we went back to, he actually used to have a suite or something in a hotel. I think somebody said he owned the hotel. So we went back there with Wilko Johnson, Norman Watroy, the drummer, and we went into the hotel, and we basically had this private room, was it, bar kind of thing, to ourselves. Well, it might have just been because it was actually quite late. And anyway, Wilko was in awe of Van Morrison. It turned out that Van Morrison was in awe of Wilko, because Van Morrison says that he thought that Dr. Feelgood, and he went to watch them apparently quite a few times with Wilko, and he thought Wilko was like a firebrand, etc. And it's exactly what the music business need at the time, quite rightly so, quite agree with him. And in reverse, Wilko said that when he had some dark days, which was caused, frankly, by drug taking, he was very down, and he said the only album, the only music that could get him out of it was St. Dominic's Preview, which of course was one of Van Morrison's favourite albums. And funny enough, it was one of my favourite albums. And so we're sitting talking about that, and I think that Wilko gave Van Morrison Mick Green's phone number, because Mick Green eventually joined the band, and we were talking about that. And I won't say what Michelle Rocca and her brother said, because it wasn't particularly PC, even at the time. And he asked us what we were drinking when we got there. I think I was drinking whiskey. Basically, whatever you said, you would get a whole bottle of it. So I got a whole bottle of whiskey, and these bottles were on the table, obviously. He was drinking rosé wine, actually, I can remember that. And there are all these bottles on the table, and I can't remember what everybody else was drinking. I think Wilko was drinking whiskey as well, and Norman was drinking whiskey. Can't remember what everybody else was drinking. I think Michelle Rocca was drinking something like Bailey's or something like that. Might be totally wrong about all this, but I remember I was drinking whiskey. So anyway, there was a mix-up. Apparently, he poured a big glug of somebody's whiskey into his wine glass and downed it, expecting to get a mouthful of nice rosé wine. I got a mouthful of whiskey. Wasn't very happy about that. But anyway, so the evening sort of ended about that. I remember we walked back, Wilko and I, along the quay of the river, the Liffey, to our hotel. And it was quite early in the morning, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and the birds were coming out and people were starting to go to work and things. And it was just an interesting moment in my life. And I stupidly, somehow, Van Morrison said to me, I must have said something to him, but he said to me, "What do you want to know? Ask me anything." And I asked a stupid question, something like, "What's your favourite song?" or something. And rather than tell me to F off, which bear in mind that we were all a bit drunk by this stage, he went through a very, not a long explanation. He basically said that it tends to be the song he's just recorded, or it changes every day, just about, is what he said, which is a very good answer. And I'm sorry, if Van Morrison ever watches this, I do apologise that I asked such a mundane, boring question, because he must have got, this is why he doesn't like meeting people like me, because we asked him stupid questions. At least I didn't ask him to play Brown Eyed Girl. Phew, what a relief, eh? Brown-eyed girl. Well, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, you know what to do. And the algorithm thinks you might enjoy this video next. Goodbye.